California shows up and shows out for Donald Trump. Terrorists in training vandalize D.C. again. Shoplifting is apparently a new American pastime, and Gavin's fast food minimum wage has left at least 10,000 jobless in his hellhole state. I'll get into all of that next with Steve Hilton. It starts now. So California is still a liberal hellhole, do not get me wrong, but don't be fooled. Amidst the illegals, the thugs, the felons, the homeless, the Hollywood pedophiles, the Silicon Valley nerds, and the communist overlords who oversee that dumpster fire, there are indeed some good patriots left trying to sew that crap hole back together. And those patriots showed up for Donald Trump over the weekend. His campaign also raked in millions at fundraising events up and down the Golden State. But I think my favorite part of it is reading the articles put out by the liberal outlets like the LA Times. The writers clutching their pearls over the popularity of a convicted felon, Donald Trump, in their state. Apparently, Donald Trump is the only convicted felon California liberals don't celebrate. Imagine that. Look, Donald Trump isn't going to win California. There are far too many Democrats and far too many mail-in ballots for that to be a possibility. But the energy for Trump, and maybe even more importantly from Trump, is palpable. Join me now with his take on all of that and more from California is Fox News contributor and host of the Steve Hilton Show, Steve Hilton. Steve, it's great to have you. I love your California background. I'm just happy I'm in Tennessee.
I know. I've been there. I know why you love it. It's great. By the way, what a fantastic introduction. I think we need you here to join the fight. You basically summed it up perfectly. But look, the thing is about California is that, I mean, I'm on the road the whole time now, up and down the state, trying to lead what I call the California revolution, because exactly as you say, like everything is a disaster. We've had like nearly 20 years now of one party rule, the far left, literally every single issue. It's all, we're the worst in America on pretty much every measure you want to pick. But actually, there's real energy for change. And it's a much more Republican state even than people think. I think you're right to say that, you know, in the short term this year, you're not going to get Trump winning the state. But even if you look back at statewide elections over the last few years, it's a more Republican state than people think. So the way that the media wants to describe it, because of course they want Republicans to be demoralized here and kind of give up the fight so they can keep going with their one-party rule. You'd think it's like an 80-20 Democrat-Republican split, but it's not that. It's actually Republicans very consistently get 40% in statewide elections. Okay, that's not a majority, but it's more than people think. And it's growing because people are so sick of all the nonsense.
Well, I'm wondering, though, I mean, we look at the San Diego sector now with Biden's border order. We're seeing actually more people flooding over. Yeah. And in San Diego, you know, the Fox team has been reporting that according to CBP memos for the San Diego sector, they really only want to hold people from 6 countries that they consider high interest. But the rest of them, they're basically advising that they have to let them go. They drop them off at the trolley station in San Diego. I would imagine the people that live in California are not happy about people from Yemen and Turkey and China all over the world being just dropped off at the trolley station in San Diego. Not inexpensive to live in San Diego, by the way. But I'm wondering, though, if that's just become part of the norm in California. You just expect that there's going to be illegal immigrants. You expect that they're going to get health care and education and every other social service benefit. Or do you think people are starting to change their minds now that they're seeing this mass influx now?
They are. And exactly as you say, because it's got to the point, I think, with a lot of these issues, it's got so far now that you're seeing people saying, look, enough is enough. I mean, we're now the absolute epicenter of the border crisis, Biden's border crisis. You've got this terrible combination of the federal open border far left ideology coming from Biden and Washington. And you've got exactly that same far left open borders ideology right here in California with the government here, or at least in the other states, you've got governors who are pushing back, like Abbott and so on. And so, of course, it's all shifted here. But you know, the thing that I'm really seeing, there's one thing that happened recently, which didn't get a ton of publicity across the country, but it just shows you how outrageous they've become on this issue. Is it the California legislature? There's a bill in the legislature, if you can believe that, okay, you can believe anything because they're so crazy, that not only all the other issues you listed in terms of things that you get if you just show up across the border, paid for by California taxpayers, in a way the most insulting, given the fact that here in California, we have the highest housing costs in the country. That's why so many people are moving to where you are from California. We have the lowest home ownership in the country. And remember, this is the home of what is supposed to be the California dream, where you can buy a home and a nice yard and enjoy the weather. That's completely crushed for most people. So guess what they're doing? This is a real bill in the legislature. They want to give down payment assistance, right? Taxpayer funded down payment assistance for illegal immigrants to buy their own home. Where you've got incredibly hardworking Californians who, 20 years they've been working hard. They can't save up enough money to fund the astronomical prices of housing here. But yet you just wander in across the border and you get taxpayer funded down payment assistance. It's really, really driven people crazy. And by the way, the people who are most offended by this is the Latino voters, for example. That's 40% now of the state here in California. I talk to people in those communities the whole time, and they've been here, they work hard, they're part of the community, and they are absolutely infuriated by what's going on now with the border.
Well, they should be, and they should also be infuriated, all Californians, about the homeless crisis or the homeless industrial complex. I mean, there was just that state audit, which, to your point, didn't get enough coverage, that $20 billion essentially went poof. They can't, even according to a state audit, this isn't conservatives doing it. This is a state audit saying $20 billion, and you can't really track what it went to. And then every time they build some kind of housing, they wanted to do tiny homes, and now they want it in downtown LA. They want to build a hip building with a gym and a restaurant, and they want to make it just as comfortable as possible for the homeless. San Francisco, they want to have free groceries for the homeless and people who need it. But that $20 billion just goes poof in California. But then you have Gavin Newsom, who still stands there and says that he's addressing it. We're on year 11 of his 10-year plan. But I think people are still buying it, that Gavin Newsom really is trying to address it. We just had another proposition that was voted in to give more money to the homeless crisis.
I know.
I don't know where it's going, Steve.
Well, no, neither do they. That's the problem. Well, actually, we know, because it is exactly as you say, the homeless industrial complex. What do we actually mean by that? It's this bunch of non-profits and the unions, and they all get together and I mean, here's a really unbelievable example, right? In Los Angeles, they had a kind of mini version of what's going on in California, where they put a ballot initiative on the ballot just in LA for more money to go into homelessness. The people who paid for the ballot initiative, right, to collect the signatures and get it on the ballot, they're the exact people who the money will go to, right? The non-profits and all these organizations. So they pay to get it on the ballot, to raise taxes, then they get the tax revenue. I mean, it's just such a corrupt scandal. But the other thing about it that, again, not enough people are aware of is while they're spending all this money and it's going into the pockets of their donors and the unions and these corrupt kind of nonprofits that pretend to deal with the problem, but actually exist by perpetuating the problem. The other thing that's unbelievable, given that we know, I mean, Michael Schellenberger and others have completely kind of made this clear in their reporting and analysis over the years, that at least, 80% of the people who are living on the streets homeless have some combination of mental health issues or drug or alcohol addiction, right? So they passed a law in 2016, which is still on the books in California. It's called Housing First, which means that any organization working with homelessness cannot require sobriety as a condition of its services. So you can't actually require that someone stops using drugs or alcohol when they go into these programs. So in effect, they've made it illegal to solve the problem. And none of these new things that Newsom's talking about even touches that.
No, and I don't think they want to solve the problem. And this housing first, this we can't criminalize addiction. I know that that sounds good and it sounds compassionate and flowery to people, but it doesn't work because I mean, I lived in California for 3 years. I went back during really the height of COVID after I had left, and I saw Venice Beach and people pitching tents.
Yeah.
And these people, they enjoyed their life. I mean, would they have rather have a mansion in the hills? Maybe, but they were perfectly happy living in tents on Venice Beach. They were perfectly happy giving their government assistance. At night, they would tell me that it started to get rowdy because people had been drinking all day in their tents. They started firebombing one another. They had turf wars over drugs. I mean, it really is a third world country, but some of these homeless people, they don't really seem to mind that lifestyle because they don't have to do much. They get a whole lot and they got great weather. So it's not really uncomfortable as it could be to be homeless in California.
And meanwhile, the residents, right, who pay their taxes and so on, just get completely kind of shafted by all this. I mean, a couple of points specifically on Venice, right? Because I've spent time there with a real nonprofit, right, a faith-based organization that is really trying to get people who are on the streets off drugs and alcohol, right? But they don't get any money from the state because it's against the law for them to do that. And so it's very clear. They said to me the guy who runs this program, he said, actually, now that you're getting some of these homes that are being built at giant cost, $800,000 per shelter unit for the homeless, and they go into the shelter, but they still come back to the streets to deal drugs and to buy drugs and to take drugs. So effectively, all this kind of homelessness shelter, the way he put it to me, it's like a second home. Like they keep the tent life, the street life, because that works for them in terms of the drugs, and then they go and live in this. I mean, it's just a joke. The other thing is like it's the RVs. It's just a tiny example, but like so symptomatic of what's going on. So there's a friend of mine who's really kind of focused on this issue. She's on Venice City Council trying to fight the good fight against this madness. She got an RV parked from homeless people parked right outside her street. Every now and again, she had this guy was sort of flashing at her and stuff like that. Can't get it moved, even though it's illegal on the main on the streets of Venice to park an RV. It's illegal against the city rules. But there's no, when she went to the cops and said, "Can you please move this guy on?" It's like frightening and intimidating. It's right outside my house. I have to have my curtains closed during the day so I don't see this. They said, "Well, there's no sign on the street that says you can't park an RV on this street." And she said, "Yeah, but on the main street, on Venice Boulevard or whatever, there's signs saying you can't do that." "Oh, yes, but there's no sign, so that means I can't move them on. How do I get a sign put up?" "Well, you have to go and get a petition and get 2/3 of the vote in the whole of the community to for us to put a sign up for something that's already illegal." I mean, it's just this total kind of madness that is like this war on normal people who do the right thing.
Yeah, I don't know why anybody would want to pay those prices to look at that. I mean, that's why I left. I left partially because of COVID, which I think we'll never get the real answers on. But I also left because why would I hemorrhage my tax dollars to that state to go to illegals and to the homeless industrial complex? But, you know, they try to remedy all of this with another flop from Gavin Newsom, which is this fast food minimum wage. So the 10,000 people at least out of a job now because of the fast food minimum wage. They call it a livable wage. Really, they're not only are they funding homelessness, but then they're also have illegal immigrants coming across the border that are actually suppressing wages, if you want to talk about what's keeping your wages down. But then they got this fast food minimum wage, 10,000 people not out of a job. It costs more to actually buy the fast food now for people who can't afford anything else but fast food. So I'm wondering if Gavin Newsom is actually getting pushback over this. We know that he wanted to give an exception to Panera Bread because he had some friends over there. But in California, are people thinking, maybe $20 to flip burgers isn't sustainable?
Yeah, and here's the other, the really, people can say, well, it's just the fast food, which, by the way, big employer. But it's not just the fast food industry. I mean, I'm often in the Central Valley, right? And that the biggest agricultural, industrial part of the whole world, right? We feed not just California, but America, the whole world, right? It's a huge, huge industry in California, the ag industry. And the farmers there are just totally beside themselves because it means that it's not just they don't work in fast food directly, but of course if the fast food companies are offering $20 an hour, then they have to offer $20 an hour to get the workers to pick the crops. So the whole thing is just this massive upward cycle of ridiculous unaffordable wages pushed by the unions. Like so many of the problems in California, they're pushed by unions, who of course are the donors to the Democratic politicians. So the whole thing is totally corrupt anyway. So it's actually having a knock-on effect throughout the economy. I mean, they just had another one, which they had to stall because it was so ridiculous. They had $25 an hour minimum wage for healthcare workers. And that was unaffordable in this year's budget. So they had to move it forward. I mean, the whole thing is just completely insane. And I just think it really is getting to that point where I can see, and this is what I'm very much working for, is that sooner than people think, you're going to get a real, maybe not this year, but sooner than people think you're going to get a real change in California, because on every single issue, it's gone so far left and so ridiculous.
Do you think, though, with mail-in ballots, because for me, living in California, before people started talking about voter fraud, I was ringing the alarm bells about voter fraud. Because to me, when you have a state like California that's done this long before COVID, really was the model for COVID. But when you go to the DMV, illegal immigrants can get driver's licenses in California. When you go to the DMV, you automatically get put on the voter rolls. It's up to them to actually opt out. And everybody gets a mail-in ballot. Whether you request a mail-in ballot or not, you get a mail-in ballot. So for me, the mail-in balloting and everybody just getting one showing up, ballot harvesting is legal in California.
Yeah.
Even if you just want to talk about baseline voter fraud of ballot harvesting and people that might be getting a ballot that have people harvest their ballot that don't really understand the process, don't really understand that they're giving up custody of their ballot, I really worry that that's going to prevent California from truly ever being a Republican state or even a purple state.
Well, look, I mean, you're right in everything you say. And I remember when I first heard about this term ballot harvesting here in California years ago, before it became a national thing, I actually thought they were joking. I thought there's no way they would give something such a corrupt sounding name if it was really a real thing. I thought it was a joke. Of course, it's not a joke. The unions do it, the activists, that's their whole model. But here's the good news, I think, is that actually, just as Trump is now saying, in terms of the presidential campaign for this year. So they got this new thing they're putting out there, swamp the vote. And the message is we got to get a vote that's too big to rig. We got to beat them at their own game. We've got to do ballot harvesting, do it better than they do. There's actually examples of that working in California. So a really good example is Congressman Mike Garcia. So just outside of LA, his district there, he won it in a special election. And it was incredibly narrow. It was a Democrat-held seat. He flipped the seat with a very tiny majority, like 300 votes or something like that. Then he really dug in. He's got very good operation there. Really went all in on all the things you're talking about. We hate these things, right? But you can't change it unless you win elections. So he did, they did ballot harvest, they did drop boxes. What was hilarious was that state Democratic Party and the Democrats in Sacramento, when they saw that he was effectively using their tactics, they actually tried to sue him to stop him using the exact same drop boxes that they were using. Anyway, it didn't work. And now he's winning by huge margins. The second time, I think it was like 10,000. I think this time 30. He's really doing well. And so I think if you get that right, I think there is a glimmer of hope that you can beat them at their own game.
If you got the organization to do it. Unfortunately, it just seems like the Republican Party doesn't have that. And I'm actually kind of disappointed. I know the RNC has had some shakeups, but I know that the Republican Party in California, I think they missed the boat. I think they like having fundraisers. I think they like raising money, but I don't know if they're necessarily dedicated to getting Republicans elected in California. It seems like kind of a game of influence and clout more so than it is mission focused. That's frustrating to me. But I want to ask you too something that I know absolutely nothing about, but I do remember back in 2016, ahead of that election, there were a lot of people that were saying, listen, we are going to predict that Donald Trump is going to win because of Brexit. That was something that was an indicator to people like, hey, right-wing populism, whatever it is, that's catching on in Europe. And that was, for some people, kind of a sign that maybe 2016 was going to go Trump's way, even though everyone thought that was out of the scope of possibility. Well, now in the EU, we've got right-wing populism maybe coming back with recent changes. I know nothing about that system, but I'm seeing connections, and I know that you know a whole lot about it. So what are you seeing, and are you seeing, similar pattern here?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good comparison because and I was involved in the Brexit campaign, and that was the first sign. I remember talking about it a lot on Fox at the time, that this kind of, revolution against the establishment was coming. And you're seeing it again in Europe. And what you just had were European Parliament elections. So this is the sort of EU bureaucracy that, I hate so much, that kind of sits above the national parliaments that are elected in each of the member countries of the EU, and right across the board, every country, especially the big countries, so France and Germany and Spain and so on, you saw a real rejection of the establishment. And it's the same reasons that people are sick of what's going on here, because you've got the same issues with immigration and open borders, and just people just completely taking advantage of the policies there that actually hurt working people the most. That's why you got the populist aspect to it. You've got massive increases in taxes. You've got the crime problem that's often associated with the open borders. You got all these things going on, and the kind of sense that the people in charge just don't care. And that they've got this ideology, and it's a globalist open borders ideology, and they're going to push it through whether people like it or not, and people have had enough of it. And so that rejection that you just saw in the last few days, I think it is an interesting sign that you can't push people so far before they push back. And I think that's what we're going to see here in America too.
Steve, why are Europeans so, I guess, ready to give up their culture? That's something I didn't understand just watching the influx of the migration. I understand Europe's a different beast. I understand the countries in Europe, they think differently than America and Americans, or at least, we're actually modeling them in many ways, which terrifies me. But it seems interesting to me for a continent that is so rich in culture and history, how ready and almost eager some Europeans have been in the last 10 years to just cede their culture entirely to Arab nations. You got to help me understand why they don't have more pride in their history to defend their history and their culture. It seems like they're almost scared to do so, like they don't want to be called a name or something.
I think the starting point for this in recent years was Angela Merkel when she was Chancellor of Germany, and she had a really kind of demented approach to this. And do you remember it was when you had the civil war in Syria and all the refugees and so on, and she just basically said, "Yeah, come, we'll take it," and millions of people came. And the motivation, it seems to me, looking back then, was this sense of almost guilt, going right back to Hitler and the Second World War and the Nazis, of like, we've been this bad country, we've done terrible things, and this is like atoning for that guilt. I think that was part of the driver. That's certainly what, I have family who were there in Germany, and that's part of what they would describe to me. And so I think that's the origin of it. But now you see a rejection of that right across Europe. You see it in Italy, the election of Giorgia Meloni, a couple of years ago. People are just had enough. And I think that's really a big part of why, even those, and of course, Brexit itself, where the British were saying, look, we don't want any part of this anymore. So I think that was the origin of it, a sense of guilt, but it's gone so far that, I think people are saying we can't carry on like this.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of white guilt that's been normalized, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a big part of a lot of this that's going on. Steve, last question I have for you, because I want to circle back a little bit to the elections and California. I have maintained for 2 years now that Gavin Newsom is going to be the Democrat nominee. I just see it. I see the writing on the wall. Do you think that's a possibility? And if not, do you think Joe is going to remain the nominee through November?
So it's interesting. I've seen you say that. You've been, as you say, very consistent. And when you first started saying it, and I thought, I just can't see it, right? How are they going to maneuver this? How are they going to get rid of Kamala with all the kind of identity politics that obsess the Democrats? And anyway, it's really difficult to push Biden out. I mean, he's a vain narcissist who's wanted to be president since his 20s. Jill Biden, the same. They don't want to go. It's hard to push them out. And so I've been thinking, no, it's going to be him. But it got so bad, right? He is so obviously incapable, and it's getting worse every day. I mean, every single time he's in public, it's just, I think the real thing that's going on now is making Democrats have to lie, right? Every single Democrat that goes on the media and has to defend all this, they know they're lying. And that's not a comfortable place to be in, to lie on behalf of your guy. And so I think actually I've come to the view that you're right, that they are going to try and find a way to get him out. And they know that Kamala is going to be a disaster, worse than Biden. And so they think that Gavin's the answer because, he's got this kind of charisma and profile and so on. But I think actually once people take a look, it's not going to, they're not going to want that either. So, I mean, I think in the end, whatever they do feels to me like Trump remains the favorite to win in November.
I hope you're right. I just, when people say, Gavin couldn't possibly win because California is such a disaster. And I think, if Biden is as close in the polls to Donald Trump as he is now, being that his policies are a failure and he's also old senile and looks like he's trying to sit down in the middle of a stage in Normandy, to me, that says if there are people still willing to vote for that, they'd be willing to vote for Gavin Newsom because at least he can walk and talk. That's my biggest concern. So I keep sounding the alarm on that. I think Gavin Newsom's a real threat. I think he's a threat politically, and I think he's a threat electorally. So I just keep reminding people, be ready for it, because if they do the old bait and switch at the last minute, the Republican Party is going to need to be ready to answer that call. And I don't want everybody to be caught off guard and surprised and have to change course at the last minute and defend against Gavin. I think we need to start defending against Gavin now. I think that puts us in the best position. And maybe I'll be wrong, but either way, I think Gavin Newsom, if he doesn't run in 24, it's going to be 28. So it's never too soon to neutralize Gavin Newsom.
I think that is incredibly smart. I hope the Trump campaign has the ads already, not just written, but made, ready to go. I think that's exactly right, that you've got to prepare, because it does feel like something that, it does feel likely. And you're right. I think it's not just about the record. It's in California, because who cares in the end? He is charismatic. There's no question about that. He's a very, he's good at being a politician. And so you've got to watch out for that. And you've got to have a really smart campaign to prepare. I think that is exactly right.
We can't be caught off guard again, because we always are. Steve, it's always great to talk to you. Always great to see you from California. Best of luck to that state. I hope you can save it.
Thank you, Tommy. See you soon.
Thanks so much, Steve. All right, folks, that does it for this episode of Tomi Lahren is Fearless. Please be sure to go like and subscribe our brand new YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. We would certainly appreciate it. Full episodes as well as all the content lives there. And I will see you right back here live at 1 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. But until then, from Nashville, God bless and take care. What's up, guys? Thank you for watching Tomi Lahren is Fearless. If you want more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click here and make sure you subscribe here so you'll never miss a beat. I'll be here every weekday and I hope you'll join me.